Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out on a rainy evening to hear the results of the Independent Fiscal Office looking at... Okay, is this better? I apologize. Welcome everybody on a rainy night to hear the results from the study done by the Independent Fiscal Office on fiscal implications of a York County School District consolidation. You will note that on each chair there is a note card. If you have questions as you view the presentation you're about to receive, write them on the note card, pass them to the aisle. Where's John? John, wave your hand over there. John, if you need a pen, wave for John, borrow one from a neighbor, whatever. But that's how we're going to handle the questions, if you would just write them on a note card and pass them to the aisle for us. I'm going to ask the members of the legislature sitting in front of us here to introduce themselves. And we'll start off with Kate Klunk, Representative-elect.
Kate Klunk, Representative-elect for the newly created 169th District, and I'm from Hanover.
Seth Grove, 196th District.
Representative-elect Kristen Phillips-Hill, the 93rd District from York Township.
Representative Stan Saylor from the 94th District, Windsor Township.
Good evening, everybody. Keith Gillespie, 47th District.
Will Tallman, 193rd District.
Good evening, everyone. Kevin Schreiber, 95th District from the City of York.
Very good. Representative Saylor is going to introduce Mark Ryan and say a few words about the study. Representative Saylor.
To start off tonight, this is for really, I guess, the first public appearance that Ron Miller's had since he's retired. If you would, please join me in recognizing him for his many years of service with a round of applause. Thank you. Ron was always as a former school board member, he was always a great advocate for education, so he's at home here tonight. Plus, he also used to serve on the school board here at Votech as a rep for Dallastown. Anyway, over the years, all of us who have been serving as state representatives have gotten questions about why don't we consolidate schools? And it's come from a variety of people, some people in favor of it, some people opposed to it, and we never had all the answers. So the delegation decided last year that we should do a study. And who should do the study? Many times studies are done by people who have a special interest or a vested interest in how the study comes out. We, in the General Assembly several years ago, created an agency called the Independent Fiscal Office, basically because over the years, many governors got elected and they forecasted economics when it came to budget time to best suit them politically, Democrats and Republicans alike. We decided it was important for the General Assembly to have the best and most independent analysis of economic issues. And so when our delegation decided to do some research into this, we thought they were the perfect agency to take a look, independent, with no vested interest in however the decision came out, to do the research as to whether and how consolidating York County school districts would play out financially for York County. Mark Ryan, who is the Deputy Director of IFO, Mark has served in many capacities over the years, from the Department of Revenue. He was former Executive Director of the House Finance Committee, and has done an outstanding job over the years and has been recognized for his service. And I want to welcome him and Karen Maynard and Lauren for their outstanding job in doing the work they've done. It was quite a bit of work and research to try and put this program together, and I think they did an outstanding job. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Representatives. It's good to be here tonight.
Mark, I was asked to, before you get going, to remind everyone that this is being streamed live. There is no tape delay, so be careful with remarks. It's being streamed live.
Good evening. My name is Mark Ryan, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Independent Fiscal Office. With me tonight are Karen Maynard and Lauren Monshine, analysts who contributed to this report. And before going any further, I should note that the report and the slides for the presentation are available online at the IFO website at www.ifo.org. www.state.pa.us. We have very good attendance here tonight. We ran out of handouts, so for those who have access or are watching the streaming version, you can access that on the IFO website. Before I get into the report, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about the Independent Fiscal Office. The office is an independent, nonpartisan agency that began operations a little over 3 years ago. The primary duties of the office are to analyze fiscal, economic, and budgetary issues for the General Assembly and the public. Our mandatory products include an annual revenue estimate on May 1st, an updated revenue estimate by June 15th, a 5-year economic and budget outlook by November 15th, and that's our most recent product. And coming up by the end of January, we'll do a mid-year update of the annual revenue estimate. We do undertake special reports, such as the one we're discussing tonight, as time is available and after completing our mandatory duties. Finally, we should note that the office does not make policy recommendations, and the report does not include any. I'd like to start by providing you with an overview of tonight's presentation, which can be broken down into 3 main parts. First, we discuss the scope of the report and the assumptions it uses. Next, we provide an overview of the potential savings and costs of a countywide consolidation. In doing so, we specifically address the savings from consolidation of district-level administration, the impact on property tax relief, debt service, and costs from changes to state funding and salary standardization for staff. Finally, we'll move into a discussion of the potential real estate tax rates under various scenarios for consolidation. We also discuss the major findings of the report. The 15 York County school districts, excluding West Shore because it's only partially located in York, were treated as one district levying uniform real estate and earned income tax rates for the purposes of the consolidation study. The report focuses on district-level administrative consolidation. This would include staff such as superintendents, assistant superintendents, operations staff, business staff, human resources staff, supervisors, and other managers. The base year for the study is fiscal year 12-13 because it represents the latest year for which data were available. We used 2 snapshots of this base year. First, we view totals of the actual data for the 15 individual school districts. And then we viewed a consolidated school district, which is a simulation based on what would have occurred in the 15 districts had they been consolidated for the full year, again, fiscal year 12-13. For the purpose of computing real estate tax rates, which is the final end product of the analysis does exclude building-level administrative costs. The original request to the IFO was to address district-level costs, which we'll define a little bit later. There was no intent to address the costs of operating or administering specific school buildings. It excludes the impact of changes in federal funds. Federal funds represent approximately 1.5% of countywide revenues. And finally, it excludes costs related to the York County School of Technology and the Lincoln Intermediate Unit. The analysis has a narrow scope, and their exclusion doesn't affect the findings in a material way. One of the reasons for the report is to see how combining school districts would affect administrative costs. For example, what savings could be obtained. However, before digging into those details, we did a general comparison to see how York County districts stack up against statewide averages using 2 different measures. And I should note, for the purpose of this statewide comparison only, we do include both district level and building level costs so that we can have a comparable basis. When we move into the next part and talk about the district level spending for York County only, we'll focus only on the narrower aspect. but for now, it's a little broader. But we measure in those categories the number of administrators per 1,000 students and the administrative cost per student. The analysis found that York County districts had 10.7 total administrators per 1,000 students and spent $881 per student. These averages are lower than the statewide averages of 11.1 administrators per 1,000 students and administrative spending of $958 per student. One of the assumptions motivating the report is that some economies of scale can be obtained with larger school districts. The chart on this slide shows a statewide comparison based on equal groups of 50 students ranked from 1, which is the smallest, to 10, the largest. We looked at the two measures mentioned on the previous slide, administrators per 1,000 students, which is the red line on the right-hand scale, and also administrative spending per student, the blue line on the left scale. The chart provides some evidence that the number of administrators and administrative spending decline on a per-student basis for districts with more students. However, those economies of scale appear to be concentrated in groups 1 through 4, which include districts with fewer than about 1,800 students. Between groups 5 and 10, the efficiencies are inconsistent and less pronounced. All of the districts in York County are in the 5th or greater groups, to the right of the dashed line on the chart, suggesting that there were fewer opportunities to achieve savings from economies of scale. As we move into a specific discussion of York County administrative spending, we will now use the narrower definition that I mentioned earlier. The request prompting the report indicated that school buildings would not be affected. Only district level or central office type functions would be subject to combination under this hypothetical combination. Therefore, we excluded any administrative costs that we believe to be associated with running or staffing a building, such as an elementary, middle, or high school. We used two methods to estimate the district level costs, and both of these methods use data from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. For the first method, the office obtained data listing the titles and salaries of individual administrators and coordinators. We sorted the data to include only district-level personnel, and our report defines in more detail who those people are by the type of position and the title. For the second method, we used categories of expenditures from the annual financial reports that the school districts file with PDE. This data was supplemented with additional information from the individual school districts. The two methods produce similar results, averaging about $27.8 million, which is the amount used in the analysis for countywide district-level administrative spending. At that level of spending, each 1% of cost reduction represents savings of $278,000. The report does not project the cost of running a consolidated district, which would be the second largest in the state only after Philadelphia, nor does it project how many administrators it would require to run it. We're not the experts in school staffing and wouldn't attempt to make an assumption in that regard. But to be useful and to give members of the panel and members of the public a sense of the potential savings, we did create three very broad scenarios, at least for discussion purposes. The first scenario includes a savings of 25%, which would yield about $7 million. The second scenario, 50%, which would yield savings of just shy of $14 million. And the final scenario, 75%, just shy of $21 million. These scenarios are not projections. They're just an example of the possible savings if one were able to reach these thresholds. You'll see these scenarios again later in the presentation when we discuss real estate tax rates in the consolidated district. Next up is a discussion on property tax relief. A consolidated district would have received $800,000 less in funding for property tax relief from the state tax on slots. The property tax relief money goes to the school districts to reduce the real estate taxes for homesteads, which are owner-occupied residential property. The countywide average in fiscal year 12-13 was $167 per homestead, but the amount was different in each district. For example, each homestead in York City received $490, and each homestead in Central York School District received $108. The other districts were between $114 and $200 per property. In a consolidated district, each homestead in the county would have received $159. That's only an $8 difference based on the average, but a homestead in York City would receive $331 less, and a homestead in Central York would receive $51 more, as just two examples. A consolidated district would have received $5.1 million less in state funding compared to the sum of what the individual districts received in fiscal year 12-13. Most of the reduction stems from the loss of basic education funding. A main assumption in the computation is that funding is held constant from one year to the next, as has been the practice, the hold harmless part of the formula in basic education funding that you've probably heard quite a bit about. However, in addition to the hold harmless amounts, there are supplements, and a consolidated district would not have qualified for any of the 8 supplements that were in effect for fiscal year 12-13. In that year, York City actually received supplements for charter school and English language learner concentrations. The transportation funding and the state share of Social Security taxes and retirement, or PSERS contributions, differed slightly when consolidated due to changes in the specific aid ratios used in the computations. And finally, the other components of state funding are largely unchanged as they are stable from year to year, and they were unaffected by a change in the aid ratios under consolidation. Currently, York County school districts have salary schedules that pay significantly different amounts to teachers with the same education and years of experience based on the district in which they're employed. These pay scales reflect the agreements of school boards and employee associations reached through the collective bargaining process. Upon consolidation, there would be pressure to standardize salaries based on education and years of experience. State law limits the ability of a district to reduce the pay of a professional employee without his or her consent. Therefore, the report estimates that standardization of the salary scales would result in higher personnel costs for a consolidated district. We estimate that the added cost would be about $31.4 million, or a 12% increase, which we think is somewhat conservative. And this is based on an analysis of pay scales supplied by 14 of the 15 districts. Moving on to debt and debt service, the report finds that debt service totaled almost $91 million in fiscal year 12-13. At the conclusion of that year, York County school districts had outstanding debt of about $856 million, or $13,738 per student. Under consolidation, the legacy debt from the individual districts would become the responsibility of the new district. There's no impact on the real estate tax computed in this analysis because the existing level of debt service payments are already incorporated into the countywide totals that we're working with. At this point, we now move to the primary goal of the analysis, the computation of real estate tax rates for a consolidated countywide district. First, let me review the assumptions or the scenarios that go into those computations. The report uses 4 scenarios for the earned income tax, which I'll also refer to as the EIT for short. The more revenue collected from the EIT, the lower the real estate tax rate. At an EIT of 0.5%, we estimate collections of $43 million. At 1%, $86 million. 1.5%, about $130 million. And at 2%, $173 million. And each of these scenarios are included in our analysis to come. We also assume other local revenue of about $54 million, which is the same as what was collected in the base year. That includes delinquent taxes, realty transfer taxes, food service revenue, and revenue from district activities. Additional assumptions affecting the real estate tax computations include some of the points we addressed earlier. And just for a brief review, for example, we estimated the loss of state funds at $5.1 million and salary standardization at $31.4 million, which brings the total costs of consolidation to $36.5 million in our analysis. These costs are partially offset by administrative savings, as represented by these scenarios on the screen, and we discussed those earlier. I would reiterate that these scenarios are not projections, nor are they a range of possible outcomes. They simply represent the savings if one is able to reduce administrative costs at the district level by the specified amount. Moving on to the findings of the report, we find that the average earned income tax in fiscal year 12-13 was 0.56%. Most districts imposed the tax at 0.5%, and a few were a little higher. The countywide average real estate tax was 20.442 mils. For a consolidated district, the report computes real estate tax rates under 12 different scenarios, the 4 earned income tax rates and the 3 administrative savings scenarios. And I won't list the rates for every scenario, but I'll give you the top and bottom. The rates range from 15.932 mils for the 2.0% EIT and 75% administrative savings scenario, up to 21.956 mils in the 0.5% EIT and 25% administrative savings scenario. Other millage rates are in between. What does all of this mean? Our analysis shows that the real estate tax millage is much more responsive to the rate of the EIT than it is to the level of administrative savings. Let me give you an example. For each 0.5 percentage point increase in the EIT, for example, moving from 0.5 to 1 or 1 to 1.5% for the EIT, the real estate tax rate declines by 1.81 mils. However, for each 25% percentage point increase in administrative savings, i.e. moving from 25% to 50% savings or 50 to 75, the real estate tax rate declines by only 0.29 mils. Additional findings include that the costs of consolidation from the loss of state funding and salary standardization very likely outweigh any district-level administrative savings that could be obtained under consolidation, even if one assumes a very aggressive level of savings. The tax bases for the earned income and real estate taxes are merged, and an unavoidable result of merging and averaging is that some taxpayers would pay more and others would pay less under consolidation. The impact depends on where one lives, the rates imposed by their current district, their level of earned income, and the assessed value of the home. The full report includes additional detail by district for each scenario that can give residents and policymakers a sense of how the individual districts are affected under different scenarios. Finally, we used a median homeowner analysis to illustrate the impacts. The analysis finds that the median homeowner in 6 of the current school districts would pay higher real estate tax rates than they do now under the 1.0% EIT rate scenario, regardless of administrative savings. if you move the rate to the EIT to 2.0%, there would still be one district in which the median homeowner would pay more regardless of the administrative savings. When we're looking at real estate and EIT, one needs to net out the effects and look at both if one is a homeowner and has earned income. So we did that analysis and determined that the median homeowner and the median income earner would pay higher real estate and earned income taxes total in at least 9 of the current districts, regardless of the level of administrative savings. This concludes our presentation for this evening. I thank you for the opportunity to present the results of our study tonight, and we're available for questions from the panel and the submitted questions from the audience.
Thank you, Mark. I would note that we've also been joined by Representative Mike Regan from the northern part of York County. Are there questions or observations from the panel? Representative Grove. As he's getting ready to ask his question, if you have any written down, pass them to John. He's on this side, and we'll try to answer your questions as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Always a thorough job. I know you guys done a great analysis on state budget. I urge people to actually check out their website for some great economic data on Pennsylvania if you want to do any projections of where actual state revenue is coming from, what it looks like, demographic report. So I just applaud you on your due diligence with this. I don't think this was a surprise. You know, if you spend 5 seconds in school finance issues, you look at York City at 33 mils, Northern at 14, split the difference. You can kind of come up with projected tax rates. And, you know, even with savings, and I know one of the main reasons behind this was we're so close to Maryland. And it's interesting with the influx of Marylanders into Pennsylvania, a lot of kind of the Maryland transplants fully oppose a consolidated school district. They move here for a particular reason. And, you know, you have the traditional Yorkers who may like that model of a consolidation. You know, Maryland does it, why don't we do it? Or individuals who have visited Virginia and other states, you know, bring up that model. But you can clearly see that administrative costs, as you reflect, don't outweigh it. What's also interesting is, you know, a combined school district would be the second largest in the state, you know, and you look at administrative costs, you know, Philadelphia's superintendents makes $400,000 to $500,000 a year. A lot of the inner cities don't have the transportation issues like your county would. So you're not going to get rid of all your school bus or your transportation entities. If you would, I pity that person trying to come up with transportation routes for busing for entire county. I'm not sure we could actually pay that person enough to go through the heartache of trying to devise those plans. But I wanted to hit on is on slide 7, you have kind of an analysis of the economies of scale, and obviously York County is 5 and over. But for those smaller school districts, is there, through your research, is there economies of scale for potential consolidation in those areas at all, enough to outweigh the over kind of like the standardization of the school districts?
We didn't specifically look at those school districts to determine whether or not. We looked at them only as a comparison for York County. I think just from experience, those are smaller rural districts, and you'd have to look at the geography and whether the areas would be amenable to consolidation. They may or may not. So I think there probably are some opportunities just based on economies of scale, but whether the geography and other factors would make sense for consolidation, that would have to be more of a local issue. We didn't specifically study that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else from the panel? Well, I have the first question. I'm not sure how you can possibly answer this, but it says, what if just York City School District was consolidated? Well, you'd have to consolidate it with something. So I guess you could almost take the data that you produced and take 2 school districts and try to replicate it the same way if you would consolidate it with one of the neighboring school districts? Is that pretty much the way that scenario would play out?
Yes, in theory, one could take a subset of the school districts we looked at and do the same type of analysis to see how the numbers shake out.
The next question deals with how much did this study cost, and since it was done sort of in-house with the state, I don't know if there's an answer to that, because you people are employed full-time to do your job, but please weigh in, Mark. Is there?
Sure. Our primary purpose when the office was created was to do revenue estimates and budget analysis, but we do work in these special studies when time permits, so there's no additional cost for staff, salaries, or anything to do these type of studies. We work them in, and we use our existing staff in order to do so. So there's really we didn't contract with anybody outside. We did it all internally, using our own resources and the resources of the Department of Education, and really are thankful for the cooperation of school districts, the superintendents and business officials who responded to our requests for information. They provided very valuable assistance, so we appreciate that.
Thank you. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark, thank you for your testimony and the work of Lauren and Karen and your other staff to put this together. A great report. On slide 18, the bottom 2 bullet points talks about higher real estate tax rates for 6 districts at a 1% EIT. Are you prepared to share what those 6 school districts, who those school districts are?
Sure. We list them in the report, and let me just find the correct page. For those who have reports, I believe it's on page 39, and it's listed in a footnote. So it's footnote 43. At the 1% EIT rate, the districts are Central York, Eastern York, Hanover Public, Northern York County, Southwestern, and Southern York County. And if you move to the 2% EIT, then the one district that would still pay higher real estate taxes, in which the residents would pay higher real estate taxes, would be Northern York County.
Okay, obviously I need to study that a little bit, Mark, but I take it if they're not listed in as one of those 6, then they would be one of the 9 then that's not listed?
Correct. They're one of the 9. Those that are not listed in that footnote would have lower real estate tax rates than they currently pay.
And can one safely assume that they have higher real estate tax rates now as a result?
Yes.
Or would that not be a good assumption?
Well, in general, the districts with higher real estate tax rates would benefit from consolidation because everything gets merged and averaged together. You're sharing a tax base, so those with higher rates would tend to benefit. Those that tend to have current lower rates would not benefit or would not benefit as much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Anybody else? Any other cards being passed up? I have one last one that I'm going to share in a minute here, but if there's others, this one will allow the panel to talk forever if they wish. That's why I was waiting to see what else might be coming forward. This question has to do with the administration cost, how it was figured. I believe you briefly touched on it, but maybe you could expand. Did it include less superintendents and assistant superintendents? Did it consolidate all transportation departments, consolidate cafeteria food services, all those things?
Sure, I can give you a little bit of background. We didn't make any assumption about the personnel that would be needed to run the district. Our approach was first to do an estimate on how much is spent on district level administration using a couple different data sources based on job titles, based on the annual financial reports. we came up with our $27.8 million for the total pool of administrative spending, central office, district level. From that, we just did a very, very simple 25, 50, 75% threshold analysis. So if you could reduce costs, however one chose to reduce them, whatever positions would be needed to administer a district of that size, if you could reach 25%, you'd save $8 million. If you could reach 50%, you'd save this amount. So we didn't really identify the specific personnel. Now, as far as just on transportation, because the scope of the analysis was limited to district level, and there's no change in the school buildings, our assumption was, and there was no change intended by the representatives in where a child attended school. So there would be no change in transportation costs under our analysis because there are no changes in the school buildings. Really the same with cafeteria, except for perhaps the top person in the district who's in charge of all of those operations. Those type of positions were included in our pool of administrative costs that could potentially be subject to consolidation depending on how a new school board for consolidated district would choose to organize.
On this card, there is one last question which didn't really fit with that scenario. But why was the assumption made that all salaries have to be raised to the highest level?
Well, there are provisions in statute that restrict the ability of a district to reduce the salaries of professional personnel. And our assumption is that either immediately when the school districts would be consolidated, or as the existing collective bargaining agreements expire and are renegotiated, that there would be upward pressure on the salaries. And with the limitation and the restriction on the ability of a district to reduce the pay of an employee, the pressure would be up, so they could only go up. And I think that's borne out by past analyses and other studies of mergers that didn't occur around the state because of the cost of that standardization of salaries.
Thank you. The next question might be more Representative Saylor.
To add to what Mark's comments were there is we've taken notice when we did regional police mergers that the same thing happened. We had to raise salaries and change benefits according to the higher salaries of the merging police departments. So it's difficult when you're merging to not go to the higher salaries. It's just when you're dealing with union negotiations. So.
I would probably note that that's indicative of the difference between the private sector and the public sector, and it does make it difficult. This might be more appropriate for the panel, but Mark, it's with the Basic Education Funding Commission doing its work, wouldn't this present the potential to invalidate this study? I looked at the question and it didn't pop into my mind immediately how I felt about it. I don't know. With the Basic Education Funding Commission doing its work, wouldn't this present the potential to invalidate this study? I don't know.
That would depend on what funding formula you come up with. I mean, and let me give you a couple scenarios right now. I'll use York City as an example. And York County, comparing York County to Philadelphia School District. Philadelphia School District right now gets a subsidy for being a poor school district. York City does not get a subsidy for being a poor school district. Now, when you look at the financial numbers, exactly, I see the face. When you look at the numbers, though, Philadelphia School District remember, we have 15 school districts in York County. Philadelphia School District is wealthier than 12 of our school districts in York County, yet they get a poverty assistance, yet York City does not. So it depends how you write that formula or what's in that formula. And that's why we in York County have been arguing for years that funding formula changes. Not only would it benefit the city of York, it would benefit Dallastown and Central York and everybody, including people in Lancaster County and Chester County and Montgomery counties. So again, it depends what kind of funding formula is passed by the General Assembly as to how it would affect the report. It could affect it the same way it is. I think it doesn't change a whole lot simply because you still have to deal with the higher numbers in salaries. You don't change anything in administration. You may be bringing more dollars in, but overall, if you don't if I don't make this too complicated, if you don't consolidate, whatever dollars come in from the new funding formula are going to be stretched out the same way. So whether Central York gets more money and Downtown and Red Line get more money and the city gets more money, when you merge, those numbers don't change that much. The dollar figures change, but really the difference in the figures don't change. So it really doesn't. I can't see a scenario where anything you do in the funding formula, and hopefully it's going to be done right from our perspective here in York County, that would really change the numbers from the point of the differences. I do see that it would change the numbers of income coming into York County, but I don't know that it would change the difference in pay and administrative costs.
Representative Grove.
I think the question is if you get rid of hold harmless within the funding education, you take current dollars and redistribute them based on a funding formula, and let's say that brings in a huge influx of state dollars into York County. It depends on those millage rates, because still within consolidation, you're still going to bring salaries up, and there's going to be minuscule cost savings associated with that. I would say you're probably looking at I'd say you're probably down at the 25% level, because if you're operating the second largest school district, you're not going to have necessarily the economies of scale that you would with a smaller school district merging with another one. So you would see, I think, the millage rates drop because of influx of dollars, but that's assuming the General Assembly has votes to eliminate hold harmless on current dollars. I think that's the driving question when the new school funding formula come out. However it looks, will there be hold harmless, will there not be hold harmless, and will the dollars be driven out based on that? I think you saw from the special ed funding changes we made, it wasn't applied to old dollars going into the system, it was applied to new dollars going into the system. So I think that may address it moving forward. But again, we have a new General Assembly. We have a lot of new members in the House and the Senate. So we'll see how that battle unveils itself. But generally, you're going to still see cost of consolidation outweigh itself. I think the only application you would see with new funding dollars is potentially millage rate reductions. And that's basically taking from other school districts and giving it to ourselves. So you'd see property tax increases in those areas and property tax reductions in our areas.
Representative Tallman.
This funding commission, I'm just telling you that, and I've told Representative Saylor, I've told many others, if hold harmless is in, and I think it's going to be, by the way, if hold harmless is in the new funding formula, which is bad for York County, I'm a no vote. That's plain and simple. But there's a lot of pressure from throughout the state, including the School Boards Association, advocating for hold harmless.
The two questions remaining are sort of in conflict with each other. Well, it's interesting. At what point do you see it would be necessary to consolidate all schools in Pennsylvania, which I guess would be a state school system with a uniform teacher's contract for the state? Does anyone wish to weigh in on that at all?
I'll try.
You'll try.
Let me go back in history a little bit. I don't know the exact date, but there was a consolidation. Pennsylvania went from 2,500 school districts down to 501. We're now down to 500. And anybody out there who knows the exact date can shout it out. But what happened when that happened, when we went from 2,500 in 1957, thank you, Seth. Hey, somebody's talking about my age. But almost every politician in the General Assembly lost. And the reason for that is that as you would have today, as we find as representatives when we talk to people in each of the school districts, there are people who are for mergers, but they want to merge with certain other school districts. Like, if I were to take a show of hands here today, how many want to merge with York City? Sorry, Kevin.
I would welcome that show of hands.
But seriously, it comes down to, we all know there's fiefdom. And it really comes down to everybody wants local control. And I'm one of those who believes in local control. A state-run system, what you have to be careful of is when, like, for instance, all your money comes from the state, you lose control, just as like we do now with federal government. The federal government comes in and says, you're going to do this, you either do it or you don't get the federal dollars that come in. So the question for taxpayers is always going to be, where do you want the tax dollars coming from, whether it's paying for your schools or anything else? And so I say there will never be a state vote to reduce the size. I think it will be left up to either a county-wide type initiative or a school district by school district. I know a few years ago, and again, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, Southwestern and Hanover, I believe, took a vote on merging those two school districts, and it failed. So it really comes down to local individuals, what they see and desire. Sometimes one school district benefits from lower property taxes, and others, basically break even. But it's still, I mean, if you do a county-wide school district, and I think this is where a misconception is, you're still going to have the Red Line Lions and the Downtown Wildcats and the Eastern Knights. Nothing like that changes. Warren County has one county school district. It only has 2 high schools because it's such a small county. But they did that years ago when they were able to. In today's world, I'll tell you, when I listen to people want the state to come in and provide all the money, and then they want local control. And let me assure you of something. Having been in the General Assembly, politicians in Harrisburg just can't keep their hands out of telling somebody what to do. The mandates that we already put on your school boards that drive up the cost of education is unbelievable. And that's not counting what the federal government does. So I don't see the state ever coming in and forcing it. I think personally, if there's ever going to be a consolidation of all the county schools, for instance, I think that would have to be a county initiative. But more importantly, I think certain school districts, particularly maybe the small ones in York County, may want to take a look at that before they end up in a situation that we're finding in other parts of the state where, and I'm not going to name school districts since we're being televised, but there are school districts who wish they had merged 10, 15 years ago with another school district. But they wait till the economic conditions get such that nobody wants them anymore. So what I say to the school board and to the public out there is look at the social economic conditions of your community and how they're changing. And if you think there needs to be a change, it's going to happen in 10 or 15 years. You better do it now and not wait till you get them, because nobody wants you when you get to the point where you're actually going to cost somebody more money to adopt you or into their school system. So, we're seeing those kind of things take place in all over the state of Pennsylvania. So I'll leave it at that.
On this topic, Representative Tallman.
And I don't know if anybody from Hanover or Southwestern is here. You've been to some of my town hall meetings. And I have about a 2-inch thick, 2 reports. It's about 2 inches thick. And basically what it says is the cost per pupil, which is the only way to measure, cost per ADM, is higher in the state of Maryland than it is in IU-12. And IU-12 consists of York, Adams, and Franklin counties.
So here is the question. I said it was a little bit at odds with the prior question about a statewide school system possibly, because the person that wrote this says, now that this matter is seemingly settled, saying I believe that they believe that there isn't a cost savings and it's probably not going to happen. I encourage our legislative delegation to go to work on the real cost drivers under their control, specifically pensions, hold harmless, and mandates, which sort of goes into the mandates that was discussed. So it's not so much a question for Mr. Ryan and his group, but would anybody on the panel care to comment? And then Representative Grove. Amen. Representative Grove. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would certainly say that that would be my exact sentiment. And those are things that every single one of these people who've been sitting at this table in the very short time that I have had the opportunity to go to Harrisburg are already working on. Property tax reform, pensions, hold harmless, mandates. Representative Grove and I were in a meeting this morning and all of those things were discussed. So you have a group of advocates sitting up here at this table for those very things. And we know that no matter what we do, we have to help school districts control their spending costs so that they can help hold the line for their taxpayers and still provide quality education to their students.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Closing comments from the panel at all? Representative Grove.
Just want to thank everybody coming out. I know there was maybe some angst with our school districts about this, but I know we have sharp, astute finance people who can crunch numbers easily and probably came to realities a little while ago. But I appreciate everybody's interest in this. Again, to our panelists, thank you so much for your due diligence, your continued excellence in work, and continue to crunch numbers. To my members of the delegation, thanks for coming out this evening. And Ron, good to see you again, buddy.
Take care.
Enjoy your skiing.
A moment of housekeeping. I'm sorry. A moment of, oh, it's his. Thank you.
What was lost is found?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.